The night she finally stopped checking her phone for his name, she realized she hadn't exhaled in 4 years. Serena Voss had gotten good at that, holding her breath. At the grocery store, when a man in a charcoal suit walked too close to the pasta aisle. At the coffee shop she owned on the corner of Birch and Fifth, when a black SUV idled too long at the curb. She'd become fluent in the language of almost recognized, almost found, almost free. She wasn't free. She'd just gotten better at pretending. The shop was called Little Grounds, which her best friend Petra said sounded like a name for a toddler gym. Serena had laughed and kept it. She liked that it sounded small, unimportant, easy to miss. That was the point. The morning everything unraveled started like all the others. The 5 a.m. alarm, the worn wooden floor cold under her feet, the sound of her daughter, 4 years old and already a tiny force of nature, kicking the wall in her sleep. Serena stood in the doorway of Addie's room and watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, dark lashes against round cheeks. A stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Addie slept the way only children do, with her whole body completely surrendered. Serena pulled the blanket up and went to make coffee. She had the morning routine down to 17 minutes. Coffee. Check the bread delivery from the bakery. Flip the sign. By 6:15, the first regulars would start filing in, contractors in mud-caked boots, a retired teacher who always ordered the same thing and tipped $3 exactly, the woman from the pediatric clinic across the street who never remembered her own order. This was her life. She had built it herself, piece by piece, from almost nothing, in a town 3 states away from the life she used to have. And on most mornings, not all, but most, it felt like enough. She didn't let herself think about Nathan Hale, or she tried not to. She had met him 6 years ago at a charity gala for a children's hospital, an event she'd attended because her then-employer, a law firm in downtown Chicago, had bought a table and needed bodies to fill seats. Serena had been 27, wearing a dress she'd borrowed from a colleague, standing near the silent auction tables, and pretending to be interested in a weekend at a lake house she could never afford. Nathan had appeared beside her without warning, the way people who are used to walking into rooms without being stopped tend to appear. Like gravity simply rearranged itself around him. "You've been staring at that painting for 11 minutes, he said. "I've been avoiding someone for 11 minutes, she corrected. "The painting is a prop." He looked amused. He had the kind of face that rarely looked anything, controlled, carefully composed. But in that moment, she caught the edge of something genuine. He bought the painting at auction that night, a piece she'd admired without knowing why, and had it delivered to her office the next morning with no note. That was Nathan Hale. He didn't explain himself. He simply acted, and the world adjusted. She should have understood then what kind of man he was. The kind who moved through other people's lives like weather, present, powerful, utterly indifferent to the damage left behind. But she hadn't understood. She'd fallen in love with him instead. They were together for 14 months. Long enough for her to learn his silences, the way he took his coffee, the exact tension in his shoulders when a business deal was going sideways. Long enough for her to meet his mother, a sharp-eyed woman named Vivienne, who assessed Serena the way you assess a used car, looking for defects. Long enough for Serena to start believing that what they had was real, that a man like Nathan could choose someone like her and mean it. She was wrong about all of it. The night she found out, she hadn't been looking for anything. She'd come to his penthouse early. She still had the key. She'd had it for months, because her last client had canceled and she thought she'd surprise him. She had leftovers from a restaurant they loved in a paper bag, and she was already thinking about whether he'd want wine or beer, the small domestic negotiations that had started to feel like home. She heard voices before she reached the living room. His. And her sister's. Serena's younger sister, Camille, was laughing at something Nathan had said, and Nathan was laughing back, low and easy, in a way that Serena had rarely heard from him, relaxed, unguarded, private. They were standing close together near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittering below them, and there was something in the angle of their bodies that required no interpretation. Serena set the paper bag down on the entryway table very carefully. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She turned and left and managed to make it to the elevator before her legs stopped working correctly. She sat on the floor of that elevator for 3 seconds. Then she stood back up. She had always been better at moving than at stopping. She called Camille the next morning. Camille cried and said it wasn't what it looked like, and then, when pressed, said it had only been twice, and then, when pressed further, said she hadn't meant for it to happen, and Serena was always so serious, and Nathan seemed lonely, and it just... Serena hung up. She called Nathan that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring. "I need you to explain what I saw," she said. There was a pause, then, "I don't think this is working, Serena. I think we both know that." That was it. That was the whole of it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he had just gutted her, that her sister had helped him do it, that between the two people who were supposed to care about her most, they had managed something that felt very much like a coordinated demolition. "You don't need to call again," he added. She didn't. She was very good at not doing the things that hurt her. She discovered she was pregnant 9 weeks later. She had told exactly one person. Her friend Maren, who owned the yarn shop next to her apartment and had the excellent quality of being completely unfazed by most things. Maren listened, poured them both a glass of wine Serena then didn't drink, and said, "So what do you want to do?" "I'm keeping her," Serena said. She didn't know yet that it was a girl. She just knew. "Okay," Maren said. "Then we figure out the rest." She had considered briefly telling Nathan, but he had made himself very clear. She wasn't to call again, and beyond that, she thought about what he would do with the information. A man like Nathan Hale didn't leave loose ends. He managed them. He would want to manage this, which meant managing her, which meant her daughter would spend her whole childhood being a piece in someone else's negotiation. Serena chose her daughter instead. She took a leave from the law firm, then a second leave, then quietly didn't go back. She cashed out a small investment account she'd been building since 22. She found a rental in Harlow, Vermont, a town small enough that people noticed strangers but too quiet to attract them. She had Adelaide in March, in a hospital where no one knew her last name meant anything, in a room with wide windows and a view of bare winter trees. Addie came into the world furious and loud, face red as a beet, and Serena had laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of her. She'd looked nothing like Nathan in those first hours, just herself. Serena had cried then, finally, but it wasn't grief. It was something else. Relief, maybe. The strange lightness of someone who has been waiting to fall for a long time and has finally actually landed. Little Grounds opened 2 years later in a rented space that used to be a photo studio. Serena had painted the walls herself, a warm cream that her contractor called yellow adjacent. She'd sourced her beans from a family roaster in Vermont and a woman-owned operation in Portland, and she'd trained herself on the espresso machine by watching YouTube videos for a month before opening, which Maren said was very on brand for her. She built the business slowly, the way she'd built everything, carefully, without fanfare, with the understanding that there was no one coming to bail her out if she got it wrong. Addie spent mornings at the day care down the street, run by a woman named Bet, who was 63 and had a golden retriever named Senator, and who Serena trusted with her life. Afternoons, Addie came to the shop and sat on a stool behind the counter and very seriously handed napkins to customers who seemed to need them. She was 4 years old and already had opinions about which syrup flavors belonged together. Lavender and raspberry are friends. Addie had informed a bewildered contractor that Tuesday. "That's her professional opinion," Serena had said, and handed the man his coffee. This was the life. Ordinary, uncelebrated, and hers completely. She thought about Nathan the same way she thought about the scar on her left knee from a childhood bicycle accident. Automatically, briefly, without much feeling, he had happened. She had survived it. She had built something better on the rubble. She had been so sure on that particular Wednesday morning when the bell above the door rang and she turned without looking up from the espresso machine that this was just another day. It wasn't. She heard Maren's voice before she saw anything else. Maren, who sometimes came in for the mid-morning lull when the yarn shop was quiet, had stopped mid-sentence. The silence she left behind had a particular texture, the kind that forms when someone walks into a room and rearranges it simply by being in it. Serena turned around. Nathan Hale was standing in the doorway of her coffee shop, wearing a coat she didn't recognize and carrying an expression she'd never seen on him before. He looked older, not badly, just like someone who had spent 4 years carrying something heavy. Her first thought was completely involuntary and humiliating. He cut his hair. Her second thought arrived immediately after. Addie is 12 feet away. She moved without thinking. 3 steps to the left, positioning herself between Nathan and the back corner where Addie was sitting on her stool, carefully organizing a stack of sugar packets by color. Nathan's eyes tracked the movement. He looked past her shoulder, briefly, at the small, dark-haired girl in the yellow cardigan. Then he looked back at Serena. He had gone very still. "You found me," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She was proud of that. "It wasn't." "Yes." He stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him. "I wasn't looking for you. I was looking for a business that Holloway Capital was evaluating for a local grant program, and the address led me to." He stopped. He looked at the child again. "How old is she?" Serena didn't answer. "Serena, you don't have the right to just walk in here and ask me questions," she said quietly, aware that Addie was watching them now with the unblinking focus small children deploy on anything unusual. "That's not how this works." "How old is your daughter?" he said. Not a question this time. "You should leave." "I'm not leaving." "Nathan, tell me she isn't mine." His voice had dropped to something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was something she didn't have a word for. "If you can look at me right now and tell me she isn't mine, I'll leave. I'll walk out that door and I won't come back." Serena held his gaze. She thought about saying it. She was capable of it. The lie, the exit ramp, the clean end to a very messy thing. She had lied to protect her daughter before. She would do it again. But she had also promised herself, when Addie was born, that she would not build her daughter's life on a foundation of necessary falsehoods, that the things she chose to carry would be hers, not Addie's. "You told me not to call," she said. "Those were your exact words. Don't call again." "So I didn't." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. "I need to sit down." "There are chairs," she gestured. "I'm going to take my daughter to the back room." She crossed to Addie, crouched to her level, and said in the voice she used for difficult situations, "Hey, Ladybug, can you go check on Mr. Snacks? I think he might need some water." Mr. Snacks was Addie's stuffed rabbit, who lived in the back office. Addie regarded her mother with 4-year-old solemnity, and then nodded very seriously, and slid off the stool and disappeared through the back door. Serena straightened and turned around. Nathan was sitting at a table by the window, his forearms braced on the wood, staring at the space where Addie had just been. He looked like a man who had been handed a piece of information so large that his entire processing system had stopped functioning. Serena sat across from him. "I should have told you," she said, because she had made peace with this. "I know that. I made a choice based on what you told me. You said don't call. You said it wasn't working. You gave me every indication that I was an inconvenience you were glad to be done with, and I chose to protect my daughter from that. You chose to make that decision for me." "Yes, I did." She didn't flinch. "Because you made a decision for me first." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the street carried on. A delivery truck, the sound of someone's radio, the completely indifferent morning. "Her name," he said finally, "Adelaide." "A beat. Addie." He said it once, quietly, like he was memorizing something. "How long have you been here?" 3 years. Did you?" He stopped, tried again. "Were you going to tell her about me? At some point?" "I told her that her father was someone I'd loved very much who hadn't been ready," Serena said carefully. "I told her she'd know more when she was old enough to understand more. I wasn't going to let her grow up thinking she wasn't wanted. Just that the timing was." She paused. "Complicated." Nathan looked at her then, really looked at her, and she remembered abruptly what it had felt like to be the thing he was paying attention to. How completely it filled up a room. She had spent 4 years getting very good at not missing that. "What do you want?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. It was perhaps the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He didn't ask to meet Addie, which Serena had steeled herself for and been surprised not to face. He sat at the table by the window and drank the coffee she made him, black, no sugar, which she remembered without being asked, and hated herself slightly for remembering. And he asked her questions about the business, about Harlow, about what she had been doing for 3 years. He didn't ask about Camille. On the 4th day, she asked him about it first. She needed to. It had been sitting in the room with them the whole time, something neither of them had named. "Was it serious?" she asked. "With my sister." Nathan set down his cup. "No. What does that mean?" "It means it happened twice, and I ended it." He paused. "I ended it because I was." He stopped, started again. "I was afraid of how serious things were getting with you, and I did something destructive because that's what I do when I'm afraid. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation, and only if you want one." Serena sat with that for a moment. She had imagined this conversation many times over 4 years, the things she would say, the fury she would finally permit herself. But the fury had gone the way most things go when you've been too busy to tend them. It had faded into something quieter. Not forgiveness, exactly. More like exhaustion with the weight of the alternative. "I want to be very clear about something," she said. "Okay. Whatever happens going forward, with Addie, with any of this, you don't get to be in her life halfway. She doesn't get a father who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when it's not. She's not a tax deduction or a photo op or something you fit in around your schedule." Her voice was even, and she meant every word. If you want to know her, you have to actually be there, consistently, without conditions. Or you stay away entirely, and she continues with the explanation she already has. He held her gaze. "I understand. I'm not asking you to promise me you're a different person. I'm asking you to decide what you actually want before you walk into a 4-year-old's life and become someone she can love. Because she will love you," Serena said. "She loves everyone. She loves the mailman and the woman who fixes the espresso machine and a stuffed rabbit with one eye. If you walk into her world, you will matter to her immediately and completely. And if you walk out again, that will mark her. So decide." Nathan was quiet for a long time. "I want to know her," he said. "Then give me 2 weeks. I'll talk to her in a way she can understand, and then you can meet her here, on her terms in her space." He nodded. And Nathan, she waited until he was looking at her. "If you hurt her, I will make it my full-time occupation to ensure it costs you every single thing you care about." For the first time since he'd walked through her door, something in his expression softened into something like recognition. Like he was seeing, finally, the person she'd become in the 4 years since he'd last been unkind to her. "I believe you," he said. The meeting happened on a Saturday morning when the shop was closed. Serena had made hot chocolate and arranged Addie's favorite snacks on the counter and explained, in the careful language of children's emotional scaffolding, that someone important was coming, that this man had known Mama a long time ago, that this was Addie's father, and it was okay to have feelings about that, all kinds of feelings, and whatever Addie felt was the right thing to feel. Addie had listened with great seriousness. Then she said, "Does he like rabbits?" "I don't know," Serena said honestly. "That's important," Addie said. Nathan arrived at 10, exactly when she'd asked. He knocked even though the door was unlocked. He was carrying a small paper bag, and when Addie immediately examined it with great focus, it turned out to contain a tiny ceramic bunny he'd found at a shop in town. Serena watched her daughter hold the small bunny and examine it and look up at Nathan with the open, uncomplicated assessment only children can manage. "His ear is bent," Addie said. "He had a rough trip," Nathan said. Addie decided this was an acceptable answer. She named the rabbit Percy and put it next to Mr. Snacks and declared them friends. Serena stood back and watched Nathan Hale, CEO of Hale Capital, a man who had never in her experience looked uncertain about anything, crouch down to Addie's level and ask her very seriously what she thought Percy's favorite food was. "Strawberries," Addie said without hesitation. "Obviously," Nathan agreed. Serena realized her chest hurt. Not in the old way, the bruised, guarded way she'd carried for years, just the ordinary ache of something long held finally being set down. The harder conversation came 3 weeks later. Camille had called. Of course she had. Nathan's presence in Harlow wasn't invisible, and somewhere in the chain of mutual acquaintances and social media algorithms, the information had found its way back to Chicago. Camille wanted to talk. Camille was sorry. Camille had been through a lot of personal growth since then and had done therapy, and she hoped Serena could find it in her heart to. Serena let her finish. Then she said, "I forgive you, Camille." A pause. "You do? Carrying that isn't useful to me anymore." She was standing at the kitchen window, watching Addie chase something in the backyard, a butterfly, maybe, or just a leaf doing something interesting. "But I need you to hear something. You're not in my life right now. That's not punishment. It's just where we are. If that changes someday, it'll be because we've done the actual work to get there, not because you've decided you're ready. Okay?" Camille cried. Serena listened until she was done. When she hung up, she didn't feel triumphant or satisfied. She felt clean, like a room that had finally been opened and aired out after a long winter. The paperwork took 3 months. Nathan's attorneys, Serena's attorney, a mediator who had the calming demeanor of someone who had seen every variation of this particular human chaos. They worked out something careful and realistic, shared legal decision-making, a schedule that accommodated Addie's life in Harlow, provisions for flexibility and adjustment as Addie grew. Nathan bought a house 20 minutes away. He spent weekends. He learned what Addie would and would not eat, which was a surprisingly long list. He showed up for a parent-teacher conference in October and sat in a tiny chair across from Addie's preschool teacher and took notes on his phone like it was a board meeting, which Serena saw through the window and had to step back from because she was going to laugh, and she wasn't ready to let him see that yet. They were not together. That was not what this was. Serena had been careful to keep those things separate in her mind, what was good for Addie and what she herself wanted, and she wasn't sure enough about the second category to do anything about it. She had learned the hard way that she was capable of wanting things that weren't good for her. Nathan Hale was a complicated case. She wasn't closing the file. She wasn't opening it either. But one evening in November, when Addie had fallen asleep on the couch between them during a movie, and neither of them had moved for a while, Nathan said very quietly, "I know what I lost." Serena didn't look at him. She watched Addie breathe. "I know what I lost," he said again, "and I know I don't have the right to want it back. I'm not asking. I just needed you to know that I know." Outside, the first real snow of the season was starting to fall on Harlow. The porch light caught it, turning it into something like a photograph of a different life. Softer, quieter, possible. Serena thought about the woman she'd been 6 years ago, standing near a silent auction table in a borrowed dress, pretending to admire a painting she actually did admire, waiting for something to happen. She thought about everything that had happened since. "I know you know," she said finally. She didn't say anything else that night. But she didn't move away either, and the snow kept coming down, and Addie slept in the warm space between them, like she'd always known exactly where she belonged.